There we go. So we're now live.
Excellent.
It will say in the corner the amount of people joining and watching, but it usually takes a few minutes to update. So, Evening, everyone. Welcome if you've just joined. Welcome to the Filey Bay tasting. We'll just obviously, as usual, wait a few minutes, get everyone online, get everyone settled in, and then we can start going through the wonderful whiskies of Yorkshire's first distillery, which is fun. So yeah, welcome. Hope everyone is well. I'm glad to say we've had a bit of better weather today, so not as rainy, but it certainly feels very autumnal at the moment. I think, yeah, not that I'm complaining.
Good wine and whiskey weather, you know? Yeah,
exactly. Perfect. It's great for whiskey, you know. And we have had quite a good summer, so I do love autumn, but yeah. So as you may have noticed, we've got Joe joining us as well from the distillery today. And he's going to talk us through the kind of process of that they go through, the processes they use at Filey Bay, and talk us through the great whiskey range as well. And we've got some really nice bits on here, some sold out bits which are now quite hard to get hold of, and then some special releases as well. So yeah, should be a really good tasting. It should be good, but yeah. We'll just give it a couple of minutes, make sure everyone's on.
Yeah, sure.
Everyone's settled. So yeah, it's always the fun bit of the tasting at the beginning, waiting for everyone to get on, make sure everyone's all right. So
it's the kind of time if we were doing this in a pub or in the shop,
yeah,
or in a nice venue, you know, it's that time to grab a beer, isn't it? It's that time.
Yeah, everyone can sort of settle down. At least though, when it's with somebody, I've got someone to kind of talk to with it. When it's me on my own, I just sort of sit here a bit awkwardly.
Talking to yourself.
Yeah, talking to myself. Yeah. As always as well, if you have any questions, please do pop them on the stream. If you have a YouTube account, you can add a comment. We can answer them during the stream. If you don't want to do that, don't worry. Send us an email. I've got the emails up here, or a message on Facebook. And we can put any questions forward that you have, or answer any during the stream as well. And always, if there's something you think of afterwards, just drop us an email. We can get it sorted. Well, but yeah. So,
have you got a drink in hand, Hannah?
Not yet. No, I was just wondering. I think I'm gonna get one open. I do have to drive home afterwards, though, so that's the only slight downside about this.
That is a downside, you know. That's one of the upshots of virtual tastings for me.
Yeah. Well, it would be. I mean, I would get my boyfriend to come and pick me up. He's had car dramas today, so I'm just gonna leave it at that. But yeah, I've got the first one, just a little dram of it ready. And
very good. Well, I'm ready to go here. I've got the whiskies all set up on this side. I've got them behind me. I've also got it in front of me. I've got a beer on this side.
Nice. Very nice.
Kind of ready to go.
ready to go. Just give it 1 or 2 more minutes just to make sure everyone's on, and then we will get started. I think most of the people on this tasting we know most people. I think they've been on them before. If you haven't been on before, hello and welcome. But I know quite a few people are very familiar now with this virtual setup. Which, you know, has its pros and cons, but works pretty well, we think. So, yeah, we're making the best of the situation, really. That's all we can do at the moment. But, yeah.
Wow.
So, I think we might be ready to start. So, I shall just do a little introduction about ourselves. Obviously, many of you know us at StarmoreBoss, Jeff, Barry, myself, and Sarah, and many of you know that we have a really big sort of spirits range as well as wines, etc. But Filey Bay is actually relatively new to us, and Filey Bay is Yorkshire's first whiskey, Yorkshire's first single malt. And the first distillery in Yorkshire making whiskey, and they're doing incredibly well. We've really liked their stuff. I we've been really pleased with how they're going. And a lot of people will come into the shop and they like things like Yorkshire gin. They want local gin. So when we can offer a product that is a whiskey product that is local as well, it's really great to be able to do that. And we're getting some fantastic whiskies also coming out of England at the moment, which is nice to see. But it's not just obviously the Scots making great whiskey, and further afield like places in Japan and Sweden, but also here in England as well, in particular in our county in Yorkshire. So yeah, we're really pleased to have Joe on board with this as well, because there's a whole this range is great, and it's been something that unfortunately, because we can't offer the tasters that we used to, it's really nice to be able to get you guys to taste some of them, to see what you kind of think of them, and thinking as well, mentioning the dreaded Christmas word, gift ideas, etc. But yeah, it's really good to have them kind of on board and have them in the shop. So yeah, so I'll introduce you to Joe as well. Hello, Joe.
Hello.
As he was saying to me earlier, that he's been there from kind of the very beginning of Filey Bay and of Spirit of Yorkshire Distillery, and helped build it up to sort of what it is, and to hopefully keep it going, which is great. So yeah, I'll let you do a little introduction about yourself as well.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having us. Thanks for selling our whiskey and talking about us, and taking the time, effort, and energy to put an event on, and get all those samples packed up and everything. I know experience. Yeah. Decanting and sampling and labelling is it takes a lot more time than it looks. So we're very, very, very grateful. So thank you very much for doing it all. So yeah, my name is Joe Clark, and I am whiskey director at Spirit of Yorkshire Distillery. So ultimately responsible for making sure what we put in a bottle tastes really as good as it possibly can.
Yeah.
Amongst lots of other things, in terms of the distillery, and not just the making of the whiskey and getting it to bottle, but how along with a team of really, really brilliant people, how it looks, how it feels, how we talk about it, all that kind of thing, which is all really important. We're kind of fortunate in a lot of ways in terms of the setup we have, and in terms of a whiskey making setup, there's lots of really, really interesting, nice twists and turns in our production that you wouldn't see at other distilleries. So I'll obviously be talking to you about those tonight, introducing you to the whiskies that we've bottled so far, as well as some other kind of nice images of the farm that kind of underpins the distillery. As well as the brewery, our sister company, and cask and whiskey and that kind of thing. But as Hannah mentioned, we're very, very new. We're new to not just the StarmoreBoss range, but just in general. We started distilling in May 2016. The casks went down in June 2016. We had a 3-year period without any whiskey, as you would expect, which is a very challenging time for a young distillery. And through that 3-year period, we opened a visitor centre. We've got a coffee shop, tours, as you might expect. A little bit unusual, worth mentioning, because it's a question we often get asked. We don't make gin. We don't do white spirits. We focus solely on whiskey and whiskey production. That's what we do.
So I think that's one of the interesting things about you guys, is that you do focus so solely kind of on the whiskey side of things. And there's distilleries out there like sort of Cotswolds, for example, that wanted to set themselves up as a whiskey distillery, but in order to keep the revenue coming in, they started making gin, and that's become one of their kind of flagship products, that gin that they make. But it was a sort of always meant to be a kind of subcategory of their distillery. So I think it's quite impressive that you guys have sort of pushed through it and not gone down that gin route, because I mean, gin in comparison to whiskey is relatively easy to make. once you've sourced your botanicals and you've found your recipe that you're happy with, you don't have the same kind of rules and regulations or the same sort of length of time waiting before you can kind of even release it. So you've kind of, I feel like you guys have really sort of persevered for the past 4 years in order to focus just on the thing that you want to, which is always something to kind of keep in mind, I suppose. I think it's quite interesting. So,
well, that's really nice to hear, because we had very serious discussions about making gin. You probably imagine. It was something that we talked more about early on. We'll explore this more later. We've got a field to bottle set up, so every drop of spirit that we make is barley that Tom's grown on the farm, and we can wind that spirit all the way back to the fields, which is really cool. In whiskey, that's really unusual.
That's
how gin fitted into all of that and whatnot, but it just didn't really, feel like the kind of road we wanted to go down. And we had to fill that gap in other ways, and we did that with a series. I've got some very old, the kind of very first bottlings that we did, pre-whiskey bottlings up there. We sold at the distillery, and of course we had the coffee shop doing its thing, and tours running. We did really well on the tourism front. We got some really nice awards. We beat Jorvik Viking Centre last autumn.
Oh, really?
In a tourism award, we got 36,000 visitors that year.
Wow! I remember the Viking Centre. I think I went there on a school trip.
But they probably see 36,000 visitors in a week. Or a fortnight. But it was, so the tourism side for us was really important, building that up. And we did private casks as well, casks for private ownership, which was, for us, kind of filling the gap. But between that kind of first cask rolling in the warehouse and getting to a finished product, that was June 2016, and we launched our first whiskey on the 5th of October last year. So this year has been incredibly weird, for everybody. Whatever you do or wherever you are, it's been a weird year. But it's also been a really fast one, because we're kind of reflecting back, going, "Oh my God, it's been a year since we launched."
It's felt like it's gone quick this year, even though we've been, we spent a lot of time indoors and not doing things we would usually. It has felt like it's gone quick this year, definitely. So,
we're kind of quite a small team, so we have. We're busy people, and that definitely made it kind of fly by. So the first whiskey that we launched, which is going to be the first whiskey tonight. So I suppose we should taste some whiskey, shouldn't we? Before
I think so too.
People tune out and just go, where's the whiskey? And so this is dram number 1. If you're fortunate enough at home to have kind of pre-poured whiskies, it's not often you get the excuse for 5 whiskies at once, I find. So if you've been able to set up 5 glasses, then great. I suppose if you haven't, don't worry. We'll just keep working through them as we go. You can use that same glass and rinse and repeat, I suppose. The Filey Bay first release, as Hannah just put up there. So we launched this on the 5th of October, 6,000 bottles, and I think within about 5.5 weeks, it was all gone.
I think you'd sold about 4,000 in the first weekend or something like that.
Absolutely crazy. The response we got was astonishing. We had some really amazing, really unexpected kind of bits of PR, which just kept it all kind of rolling. Really bizarrely, the MP for our area, a guy called Kevin Hollingray, was in the House of Commons waving one around. And if you think back to October last year and where all the news cameras were, and they're all on Westminster, with all the goings on. And so, it was kind of these things that just kept going. But over that 3-year period, we've built a really, really amazing following. We've got a really loyal, brilliant customer base that were just ready, kind of fingers poised over the button. They knew it.
Ready
so,
to go.
as soon as we hit it, and what we found was, where we thought people might be buying 1 bottle or 2 bottles, they were actually going, this is the first whiskey ever in Yorkshire, and they definitely seized the moment, and rightly so, because this isn't around anymore.
There's certainly kind of a thing that we find when there's like a new release, people will get really excited about it, and they often want to say 2 or 3 bottles, one to keep and one to keep unopened and one to drink. So yeah, it always seems, and I think especially when you start building up the kind of reputation and things, and you've got those 3 years, you've had those 3 years to build up your reputation, etc. Especially with the tourism side of it, and so it's no wonder that they sort of sold so quickly, and people were really keen to get their hands on them. Which is good. So.
Yeah, it's an epic thing. The first whiskey from the county. Yeah, the county definitely came into bat. They really wanted it.
Yeah, definitely. I've just had a message from someone that works at Forest Distillery in Macclesfield that said they're really jealous that we're doing this tasting and they're desperate to try the stuff. So it's spread as well. It's not just in Yorkshire. I think people all over are really keen by it, and I think it's quite interesting. We often see with gin, you get sort of regional gins, and we often find that Yorkshire, Sheffield and Yorkshire gin does really well here. I'm actually from over Manchester way, and I used to work in a bar / shop over there, and Manchester and like Liverpool gin did really well over there. So you do find those sort of regional ones, but I think when it comes to whiskey, because it's not the same kind of scope as the gin industry has in the UK. I think people, when it's like, oh, Yorkshire whiskey, and I think it's a little bit more kind of sticks more into their home. So just for anyone that's just a little bit late coming in, we're starting off with the Filey Bay first release, which is the very, very first one. They released on the 1st of October last year, and there was a limited amount of bottles, all of which have gone. But yeah, that's the first one we're starting with. Great.
So yeah, I guess if this is one of the unusual things with these tastings. Normally in a tasting, you can see what everyone's doing and what they're tasting. Please just drop, nose away, sip away, kind of ease in. This is very, very light style of whiskey, and that's the kind of a really lovely kind of representation of the house style. So with the first 2 whiskies that we're tasting tonight, they really highlight the kind of core of our warehouse, our maturation style, and the whiskey that we're creating. We do get progressively richer and kind of deeper and spicier and stronger as we go through the whiskies tonight. But this is these first 2 bottlings were all about kind of showcasing just the house style. What we're kind of hanging our hat on, if you like, in terms of what is the key kind of flavor that we're making, key flavors that we're making. So I thought, should we have a look at some pictures?
Yeah,
we can get going on that. They're quite good because they kind of help steer the production in. So the opening shot was Filey Bay there. The next shot here is the gannet, that is our mascot. So if you're ever looking at any of our bottles or any of our kind of material, if it's a brochure, if it's a pop-up, whatever it is, if you walk into the distillery,
you can see it just on the logo on the top there as well.
So yeah, the gannet, and I put this picture in, in the main because people often ask what's the bird all about. We're very much a coastal distillery. We can see the sea from the distillery windows in the office. We're about 10-15 minutes away from an RSPB reserve called Bempton Cliffs, and on there, around the summer, I think there's about 200,000 birds on there.
Wow.
Maybe 30,000 of them are the gannets. And, we picked them for our mascot, so that's our kind of distillery mascot, if you like. I'll be honest, I never knew a lot about gannets until we started this they became part of this project.
Yeah.
But they're pretty cool seabirds. They can do some. They can pull off some amazing feats.
Are they a bit less annoying than seagulls?
Oh god, yeah, like these are.
They won't try and steal your chips.
Yeah, I mean, if a gannet came after your chips,
you just let it have it.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, that's what the bird's all about. It's really just trying to give you a sense of place. So we're in on the edge of a little village called Hummonby, and if you were to look at a map of the East Coast, if you can visualize where kind of Scarborough is, if you come south of Scarborough, and you have a little town called Filey, and then just into the mainland a little bit, about a 10-minute drive out of Filey, you've got the village of Hummonby, and that's where we are. And that is where we have the distillery, and also where we have our farm as well, where we grow lots of barley and make a lot of beer. So yeah, if we roll on, if you're happy to jump on, lovely. So this was a shot earlier back in the spring. The hand there is Tom. I'm going to talk a little bit about our founders in a minute. But this is, I suppose, the very origin of everything that we do, and really why we're here, I suppose. Because if you want to just strip everything back of what we talk about and take one piece of information away from what we do, it is really our distillery. It can be summarized as a big diversification project, and it all starts with the fields around Tom's farm, where his family have been growing barley since the Second World War. So he's a third generation barley farmer, and it was in the 90s, early 2000s. He, along with his wife Jill, kind of looked at what can we do to basically utilize this land, the crop and everything, more efficiently. And obviously back then the prices for cereals and grains and crops was, not great. So they set up a brewery. They set up a brewery called Waldtop Brewery. Yes. Which some of you may be familiar with. And they set that up in 2003, which is a great time to set up a brewery. It was kind of right at the kind of the point where kind of craft beer, real ale, I suppose, less so than craft beer, but real ale was really on the rise. People were looking for good, interesting beer. So so we can wind all our whiskey back to these fields, and in the world of whiskey, that's really, really rare. So go on.
So how close is it to the distillery? Is it sort of literally just a couple of miles away then? Yeah,
I mean, as the crow flies, it's about 2.5 miles from the from the nearest field to the actual distillery.
That's really close.
It's really close. I do the journey a lot because our warehouse is on the farm as well, so that's where we store the bulk of our casks. So I'm dashing between the farm and the
distillery. Because I know that a couple of distilleries. I know when we did the Macmira tasting back in May, they're quite proud of the fact they use sort of only Swedish barley, but I think they said they source it within about 80 kilometres of the distillery. And you get sort of some distilleries that are importing barley in from elsewhere. So it's really nice to know that it's quite literally 2 miles down the road, 2 and a bit miles. So it's definitely got that. Well, you can see it's very much field to bottle, which is it's really interesting.
Yeah, it's good. It's a privileged position to be in terms of a whiskey making position, because it's just not normal. If you have a distillery farm set up, which there are a few, you can count the kind of field to bottle whiskey distilleries across England and Scotland really on one hand. And I suppose Kilhoman's a really good comparison, and we're very similar in a lot of ways. Very different style of whiskey, but very similar in a lot of ways. And I mean, we grow, typically we'll yield about 600 tons of malt off the farm. We use 200 tons of that for whiskey production. Now I'll tell you what that actually means in terms of whiskey in a bit, but you know, we've got a lot of barley there, and we've got a lot of room to grow into that barley as we make more whiskey.
Yeah.
So we can yield 600 tons. Send that to Muntons Malting in Bridlington, which is 9 miles down the road. And yeah, we work in well, the kind of production batch at Muntons is 200 tons. So we can Tom can ring fence all his barley. They can send it in, get it malted, bring it back to the farm and store it, and we'll draw on that throughout the year. And what we don't use for whiskey is going to get used for beer, basically.
Yeah.
Against the grain.
So nothing gets wasted in the process.
Oh, absolutely not. Yeah, you know, this is a Yorkshire farmer. At the end of the day. Waste isn't just not in the dictionary.
They're not in their vocabulary. They don't know the definition of the word.
Yeah. If you roll on slide, that's a shot from this year. It's actually a shot from last year. It's quite a nice shot because you can see the turbines. So this was last August. So we've got a couple of big turbines up there, driving energy into the brewery, into the farm. And you know, it's called Wold Top Brewery for a reason. You know, it's on top of the wold, so it's windy. That's a good place for turbines, and we generate a lot of electricity, which is brilliant. More than we need, so it goes back to the grid, which is great. With the farm as well, we trialled last year in the fields a way of planting grain called direct drilling, which is it's a very new, very progressive idea in barley farming. It's the kind of thing which will probably be in 10, 15 years will be absolutely replaced if all the science and everything stacks up. But basically, it's a process where you don't plough up the land to plant the grain. So you drill in and you don't disturb all the root structure and you don't turn over the soil. Okay. The science behind this is that you're locking carbon in and it's better. You know, the long and the short of this means eventually, you know, we could be in a position where we've got a carbon neutral whiskey because of this, amongst other things.
That's an interesting.
Yeah. Oh, it's amazing. It's really amazing. I mean, I'm not in the farming side of stuff, you know, so if anybody's got questions on that kind of thing, you know, do put them in and I can definitely get you the answers for it. But in terms of the importance of that, not just for us, but for barley farming and farming in general and the impact that can have really positive impact for the whole world of beer making and whiskey making is amazing. So there's a shot of some malted barley. If none of you have seen malted barley before, there it is, beautifully cascading off we're taking a ton of malt through our production process on every day that we distill. So we use 4 tons of malt a week, and we distill on a Monday, a Tuesday, a Thursday, and a Friday.
Wow! So quite a lot of malt.
Quite a lot of malt, and you know it makes a fair amount of alcohol. You know, every ton of malt will give us 5,000 litres of wash. Yeah. And that's basically you know, in whiskey production, very, very similar to beer production in the early stages. There are of course differences, but the principle, like malt barley, mill it, mash it, turn all the starches in there into sugar. You have a sugar sauce. You then add yeast, ferment it, and then we distill it. Every ton of malt, 5,000 litres of wash, which we ferment at 8%. And if there's any nerdy kind of people that are really interested in that kind of stuff, I'll just very quickly hit you with a few little bullet points. We use 2 types of yeast. I'm not going to tell you which. We do keep them slightly closer to our chest. But we do use 2 types, and we pitch them at different temperatures in order to kind of optimize their initial the initial kind of pitching the yeast to make sure that they're doing their thing as we want them to do it. And this is all about generating more fruity flavors into the wash, so we can get more fruit of our spirit character. We'll typically ferment 75-hour fermentation. That's the minimum. Yeah. For us, which is longer than the industry average. Yeah. which is, I would say now, probably around 50, 55 hours for bigger distilling companies. But at 75 hours, we've got all that, all those lovely sugars turned into alcohol, and we've got a section of fermentation where the yeast has done its job, it's worked through all the sugars, and it's moving into a malolactic stage of fermentation where it creates lots of lovely
creaminess.
Do we have do you want a nerdy radar, Hannah, if you want me to dial it down or dial it up?
You can if you want. I mean, I think that's probably a good amount, because I think it depends if you want to go into lots of detail about the distillation and the fermentation process and things like that as well.
What I'm always conscious of is that it is a whiskey tasting, and we do need to taste some whiskey amongst all the chat. I suppose should we? Yeah, do we?
So just quickly on the first release, you just mentioned obviously then about the different yeast and the fermentation and things. Do you have different cask? We've obviously got different cask finishes. Do you have a kind of set, like a set recipe for your cask aging as well, or does that sort of change from batch to batch? And if so, what's the kind of cask finish that you've done for the first release?
Sure. So we're in a position now where we filled nearly 2,500 casks. We want to create across that warehouse a degree of consistency. We focus mainly on first fill bourbon barrels, which are 190 to 200 litre capacity, and that is the bulk of the stock that we've laid down. And in terms of the first release, it was a combination of 16 casks from July, August 2016, and it was 15 bourbon barrels and one sherry butt, an Oloroso sherry.
So there's a tiny bit of sherry in there, but just a very tiny bit.
It's small, it's like 14% of the overall component of that, and it was just a nice, when you're putting these together, you spend an enormous amount of time, with these casks and with all the subsequent samples. I remember working through every cask that we filled in 2016, trying to pinpoint and pick out the right ones for these early bottlings, and the ones that were really in the lead and the ones that were really singing. And that addition of sherry just helped kind of just add a bit more depth to it, and just give it a bit. It just helped kind of round it off, and just helped add a bit more depth. And the bourbon cask is brilliant for these kind of lovely light flavors. Coffee, vanilla, honey, citrus, and the sherry's are perfect for bringing in a little bit more spice and a bit more kind of oomph.
I think that the first release for me, it's got a really nice, quite fruity nose. You mentioned about the fruit earlier from the fermentation, and then it's got quite a nice creaminess on there, almost a little bit like a white sort of chocolate note on it, and a little bit of spice kind of on the finish. We've just got 2 comments on, one asking to move on to the next one. I think people are keen to get to some of the other ones. But then we've got a question through from Andrew, asking a nerdy/beery question. He said, do you try different washes to see the difference it made to the final new make spirit?
So there was a bit of playing around at the start, but we've been pretty consistent in that area. We're more likely to start introducing kind of more experimental stuff once we've got a really good foundation of stock. So we've picked a lane and we've stuck with it. There is, we've got a whole list of ideas and things that we will end up doing, right? But we've been pretty measured, and the reason for this being, and we will get to the second whiskey, I promise. If you want to get onto the second whiskey, go for it.
If anyone would like to start, we're doing the second release next. surprisingly. The second release next one. But yeah, sorry, carry on, Joe.
Good. So yeah, the reason for this being is, you need to have, in terms of the scale that we're making whiskey and what we want to do with it and how we want to get it out there and sell it, is, you need to have a foundation of stock where you've got a good kind of balance. You need a consistent flavor profile.
Yeah.
I think where some distilleries can get a little bit overexcited a bit early on is doing the loads of different experimental yeast and washes. So your distillate character is doing this, moving around, and that's fine. It depends what you want to do with it and how you want to sell it. And it's the same on the cask side of things. If you are filling dozens of different casks and loads of different cask types and loads of different sizes, then again your maturation is doing this.
Yeah, it's going on a bit all over the place.
Yeah. So your chances of being able to establish a really nice, consistent whiskey the first 10 years of your operating are reduced significantly. And
you don't want to run before you can walk, I suppose.
Well, I think there's an element of that, definitely. And again, it just depends. It's different for different distilleries and the different reasons that people build them and want to do it and the whiskey that they want to make. But yeah, we've been pretty methodical. We've been just mastering the style that we want to make. And this is the thing. And again, it's why we haven't done loads of different spirits. It's picking that one.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That one lane and running with it. Good.
Yeah.
Second release.
So yes, second release on here, which is this one. And this one you released, was it the end just before Christmas last year, was it?
Yeah, so we took this to bottle and we had it kind of launching. Let's think back now. November.
I remember we had it for Christmas last year, but it wasn't the first release. I know that.
Yeah, and I mean we were obviously blown away by that response on the first release bottling. I had the second release in the wings. I'll be honest, I thought we all thought we'd be taking this to bottle a bit later.
Yeah.
January. But yeah, we got it out there a bit earlier, and it was tasting good. It was ready to go. There was no reason to not do it, and we were like, well, let's get it out. And it's nice because then the overlap, you see.
Yeah.
We didn't want to be in a position where we didn't have any whiskey. You can't just launch a whiskey after never having any for so long, and then suddenly, we don't have any now. You've got to keep them overlapping. So yeah, second release came along, and in terms of its makeup, if you looked at the second release on paper, in terms of its component cast and its parts, it would look almost identical to the first release.
Yeah.
But there are some differences in what you're tasting, and I'm sure if you've got them side by side, they're easier to spot.
I mean, Martin has just made a point that in the second release, it tastes more honey coming through from it. And I think you can certainly smell a sort of difference on the nose on both of them. And I'd say I'd agree with that there is a slightly kind of more sweeter sort of note in there in a way, and quite a rich sort of feeling in the mouth as well.
It is a little, the casks here were a little bit older. It did have an extra bit of time to develop. But the main differences there are driven by the differences in those individual casks as well. And certainly with young whiskey and refining young whiskey, the process of cask selection is really, really, really important. You can't just walk into the warehouse and go, right, those ones.
We'll do that one.
But that's the beauty of the product. It's the beauty of what you make. And even though, we haven't got, loads of wacky cast types here, you've still got nice subtle differences from the one cast type. So
do you have a favorite between the two, between the first or the second release, or is that quite hard to say. I suppose the first release will always be a bit like a child, I suppose. And there's like
it's a really good question. Actually, I have to say I do prefer the second release. The first release was it was such a massive piece of work and a massive undertaking. And I don't just do this on my own. There's David, one of the founders. We'll get to them in a minute. But you really want to get it right. You really want to get it right. The first whiskey made in Yorkshire, it's the first whiskey that we've released, and you've got to get it bang on.
Yeah, of course.
So the second release, I will confess, was slightly less nerve-wracking.
Yeah. I can imagine once you've got that first release out of the way, seeing how people have reacted to it, seeing the kind of response and people really enjoying it. The second release, you kind of think, okay, this is going to be all right then. People have enjoyed it. And did you make a little bit more for the second release as well, having sort of first release?
Yeah, same number of bottles.
Yeah.
The marrying vessels and the kind of the kit that we've got. Actually, good point. Good time to roll on the picture. Actually, Hannah. That's the brew kit up at the brewery. So that's a 1-ton mash roll top. And if you roll on a little bit further, there's two in front. We can come backwards. So that's the kit. And there's a vessel behind the spirit still.
Yeah.
And
so just this one here, is it?
You got it.
Yeah.
And that will comfortably hold about in total 46%, about 6,000 bottles of whiskey.
Nice.
And that's like a batch size. It's a nice batch size. It's a nice number of cars to work with, and it's a comfortable number of bottles to work with. We bottle it all ourselves as well, so we don't want to. We've got bottling is harder than it might first seem.
Well, having decanted some of these bottles into little mini bottles for you guys for the tastings, I can say that's hard enough. So I'm quite glad I'm not doing the big bottling.
So all our releases, with exception to the final whiskey that we're going to taste, are all 6,000 bottle batches.
Yeah.
Which in their nature is limited. There's no doubt about that. In terms of kind of whiskey batches from distilleries, that is arguably very small. Depends on what
I think I think some distilleries you see kind of thousands and thousands of cases kind of coming year after year. So when it's and 6,000 on paper sounds like quite a lot, but in terms of when you start allocating it out to other suppliers and retailers and things like that, it soon disappears quite quickly.
Yeah, definitely.
But
it's nice in the sense that because of the number of bottles, we wanted to make sure that as many people as possible got a chance to get it.
Yeah.
So our first release was 55 quid, and it was a 6,000 bottle release. And because of the price point and because of the number of bottles, people actually opened it and drank it and enjoyed it and had a chance to do it. It didn't just get squirreled away into collections, although a lot of it happened, of course. But it was important for us that people wanted to open it and taste it.
Yeah, of course, yeah. Well, you don't want to release it just for it to sort of sit somewhere and collecting dust and not actually being enjoyed. Obviously, there is an element, I suppose, of that. With the limited release, there'll always be that sort of thing happening. We were discussing earlier about Jeff and Barry being pros at managing to squirrel things away, but obviously there's a certain percentage that it's great that happens, but the idea of the release is that people will open and enjoy it. So it's always nice to put it on a tasting as well. And I think we like to try and do that. Sometimes, sometimes it's nice to have the stuff to keep and resell, etc., or keep for your own personal thing. But sometimes it's great to have it on a tasting and let people kind of enjoy it, because that's what it's for, really, isn't it? It's to enjoy. So
I think if that whiskey could speak and it could tell you you know, it would probably say, "Get me in a glass." You know,
don't leave me in here.
I've been in this cupboard for years. Nice. So we same number of bottles, kind of size of release. And yeah, you know, it's in our kind of house style.
Yeah.
So, you know, bourbon cask very much in the forefront, with just that little smidge of sherry, little touch of it,
just to lift it, I suppose, in that sense. Yeah, it opens out nicely. I think they're both open nicely in the glass, which is always nice as well. Makes it's not one-dimensional, which is always something I like. I like it when there's different dimensions and layers in it, and you keep tasting all sorts of different bits in it, really. So
yeah, I mean that's the difference between you know it's like, you know, whiskey that will keep you entertained.
Yes.
And whiskeys that don't, and yeah, you know, layers of flavour are really, really important. Just like instruments in a track for me, you know, it's the same. You know, you want that layering and ultimately creating balance, and balance is really important for us. It is subjective, but the best whiskies, I believe, are the ones that, you know, deliver on balance very, very well, and that's what we're striving for. We're only year one, but you know, we try.
Shall I move it forward then, or?
Well, I'll tell you what. If you drop back, I'll introduce Tom and David, who are the guys who have the guts to set this up. So the chap leaning on the bar is David Thompson, and the guy with the pint is Tom Mellor. And Tom is the third generation barley farmer, and David is a very, very old friend of 30 plus years. You know, they go back a long, long way. You know, their kids have grown up together. You know, their families have grown up together. David actually used to buy malt off Tom.
Okay.
I believe that's how they met. And, you know, so yeah, Dave would be buying malt from lots of different farmers on behalf of maltings, you know, and then malt it and sell it to brewers and distillers. And yeah, I think it was Tom, I think was arguably playing a bit of hardball with Dave on price, but I think when they hit it off was struck a deal because they both played rugby, and Tom had heard that Dave was playing for Driffield, and he said, "Look, if you come and play for our team this Sunday, I'll tell you the malt that you want to buy." They have to look back on it. They just kind of got on, you know.
Yeah.
Guys, and you know, they took the plunge. You know, they did what no one else in this county has managed to do. And back in, I can remember press releases flying out. You know, so I've been with whiskey for 15 years, give or take, in different forms. It's been obviously the last 4 years with Spirit of Yorkshire, and I can remember in that time press releases coming out. People are making a whiskey distillery in Yorkshire, and they're going to make whiskey in Yorkshire, and you know, a few years roll over and it still never appeared and never happened. And you know, credit where credit's due, because you know these guys have poured a lot of time, a lot of energy, and indeed money into setting this up. You know, the kit that we were looking at before is not, you know, that's big kit. It's not making equiment. You know, you can't hop on Amazon and I'll have a pair of them. You know?
The distills are often custom built in Germany and sent over or things like that, aren't they? So
you got it, yeah. It's a massive undertaking, and you've got to be really forward thinking, and you've got to really want to do it. This is the thing, you've got to really want to do it. As you pointed out before, you know, you can make gin relatively very quickly compared to whiskey, and so I think this is why you've got 50 plus gin distilleries in Yorkshire, and you know.
Yeah, of course, I mean, I suppose as well, you find with gin, you get people that literally have started in their back room. Like I know Whitby Gin, the Jess and Luke started in Luke's parents' house in like a little tiny utility room making gin, which is lovely, and it's great to hear that they've gone from strength to strength. But in terms of whiskey making, there's a lot more. You can't necessarily just start in in your kitchen making whiskey. I suppose it's a much kind of bigger logistical operation in that sense, working out how it's going to work, and
you need a lot of space.
Yeah.
You need a lot of patience, depending on the scale you do it.
Like when you look at the size of the stills here, these are like about 10 foot or so tall, because they go right through the floor, don't they? So they're kind of like the whole height. And you think in comparison to the people that are stood there, they are these huge machines.
They're beautiful. They are. That is some of the nicest, shiniest, arguably most impressive whiskey making equipment in the country. And I can remember walking through the doors and seeing them, thinking, "Wow, they've really not messed about here. they've definitely gone for it." And so the still closest to us, with the boil ball on there, that is a 5,000 litre wash still, and still on the other side is a 3,500 litre spirit still.
Wow.
And that these are kind of centered around a 1 ton mash. So as I say, the 1 ton of malt, which equals 5,000 litres of wash, is going to charge the wash still, or the low wine still that's at the front of the image. And that's where we kick off distillation, and that's where you take that spirit on its journey to whiskey.
So should we move on to the next one?
Yeah, ready when you are.
The next one we're going to do is the Muscatel cask, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah, lovely. So this one. I just want to make a quick note as well with the bottle. We mentioned earlier about the bird, and it's obviously embossed on the bottle. These embossed bits at the bottom here, are these kind of representative of the area and the sea and that sort of style? Kind of bringing that into it. Yeah,
you've got it. I mean, in terms of the other images that I thought about popping up tonight are of the beach. When you catch it as a tide comes out, you get the ripples on the sand.
Yeah.
You've also got everybody knows what waves look like, pretty much. But also the fields. And the kind of the lines that you see when you're at the farm and you look across the land. We've put a lot of thought into it at every point. Nothing's on that bottle by accident. And we had the glass made. If anybody watching this wants to come and see us and come and do a tour, we're open for tours. We talk. You get to see in action the bottles being made, which is really cool. A company called Allied Glass. So they're based in Nottingley, outside of Leeds. So they worked with us on making this bottle, and it's a beautiful bottle. And again, it just comes to through everything that we're doing. We're just trying to do it as best we can at every stage, and we wanted to get a mold done. It's not, again, it's for a young distillery to go in with a mold. Getting a mold done is expensive, you commit to it.
Yeah,
mold is for life. It's not just for Christmas.
Certainly in the gin industry, you're starting to see a lot of distilleries really taking on taking on sort of bespoke bottles as well. But obviously, there was Mermaid Gin a few years back who had, about a year or two back, had their whole rebrand, and since then they've kind of exploded and done incredibly well off the back of this rebrand and had this lovely, beautiful bottle made. And from that, we've started to see more distilleries going down that route, kind of making their own unique bottles. And I think it's nice to see, because if you're spending the money on the whiskey as well, and where there is an argument, I suppose, to some things where it's like, well, spending money on other things, is the liquid going to be as good? But I think it is also important as well. You know, I'm sure a lot of people can relate that part of buying, you know, some of the products that we have is partly down to the look of it as well. Which, you know, there's no, obviously there'll be people that go, well, you know, you shouldn't be judging it just by how it looks, which is obviously very fair, but that is a big part of it. And I think to sort of just dismiss that as not being important is a little bit, I suppose, naive in a sense, because you will always have customers that will look at something and go, oh, I'm choosing between two, this one looks nicer, I'll go with that one because it looks nicer. So yeah, I do think it's definitely important. But as long as it's not looking nice for the sake of looking nice, and I might be able to see it on the slightly darker bottle, but it's got embossed on the bottom here as well, kind of like Spirit of Yorkshire Distillery and things like that. So as you say, it's not just there for show. There's a reason for it being there as well. So
I've seen the empty bottles going on eBay for a tenner.
Really?
Yeah, really.
Wow.
Yeah. Had people come to us that have had the bottoms cut off to make tumblers out the bottoms.
Wow. That's so nice.
And yeah, you know, the afterlife on them is definitely there, you know.
Yeah.
For different things.
So
you make really good points on design, because you make the best whiskey in the world, but if you can't make it look good and you can't, you know, present it, then you know you're never going to sell it. And you know that is critical.
Yeah, definitely. So going back to the stuff inside the actual bottles now, obviously we've moved on to the Moscatel cask, which is a different finish. What made the Moscatel, why was the Moscatel kind of the first, I suppose, more experimental cask you decided to release? Was it just a particular, something about that made that particularly kind of interesting as a sort of single cask release in that sense, or? Yeah.
So we, in you know, over the years of production, we've obviously filled different cask types. You know, we're not just solely first fill bourbon. We have committed quite a lot of spirit to Oloroso, out to Fino as well. Nice kind of, you know, sherries like wine, beer, anything. There's a spectrum of kind of light and dry through to kind of super rich and heavy and sweet. And yeah, you know, we've got filled Fino, Oloroso, Pedro Jimenez. The Moscatel casks we started to dabble in a bit later, in terms of production. So Moscatel, in terms of the Moscatel casks for this were from Jerez in Spain, you know, so they qualify as sherry, but you can find Moscatel from the kind of sweet wine from Portugal or Italy as well. But this in terms of the origin for us, you know, effectively a sherry cask, and really just a lighter style of sherry, very, very kind of honeyed and light, and the kind of the variety, you know, it's often a coastal variety that resonated really nicely. You know, in terms of obviously with the coastal whiskey distillery, but basically it was these kind of lovely kind of nice sweet floral and honeyed and kind of marmalade characteristics that it brought to the whiskey. It just complements the kind of the bourbon cask maturation really, really nice. And crucially, it doesn't overwhelm the spirit character.
It still sits within the house style.
Exactly. It kind of you still get the DNA running through the So kind of super lovely light, but what's quite nice for a lot of people that I've spoken to, you know, actually not particularly big whiskey drinkers, but what they're loving with this is the fact that they can see that very clearly from drinking a bottle of second or first release and tasting this, and they can see the difference between that extra bit of maturation in that different cask type. And it has really kind of softened and rounded off, and it creates a really kind of beautiful fruity whiskey. And so we released this in March. It's just as everything slammed down.
Yeah.
And lockdown just kind of hit, and it was three of us bottling it. So David, myself, India, who is in accounts. India worked with since the very beginning as well, and we're there, kind of socially distantly spread out,
trying to get out ready, and
and this is kind of what we put into it. So it is very nice when we hear that people are enjoying it. It genuinely means it. So an extra period of maturation. We call it finishing. It's fairly well known in the whiskey industry now. You can often see distilleries moving whiskey from one cask type to another, and that's effectively what's happening when we talk about finishing. The length of time, can be really broad. Some people, so some distilleries might finish, move it into that second cask type for a year, 2 years. Some might have it in there for 6 months.
Yeah. So did you decide to finish this whiskey in the Muscatel cask, or is it a specific, like a kind of a percentage blend of first fill bourbon and Muscatel in the bottle? Sure. Or is it kind of all first fill bourbon, then first fill bourbon, and then put into Muscatel?
That's right. It's the latter. So it was a big piece of work. I moved between me and Dom, our distiller, and Nicola, who joined us at the back end of last year, and we moved about 12,000 litres of whiskey into different cask types. And the process on it's really, you're doing everything that you're doing for first and second release, but you kind of do it twice. By the time that you get it to bottle, because we're taking, you're doing the cask selection process. You do for the other bottlings, but then we're taking that whiskey, we're cutting it back to 50% alcohol, and then racking it into these Muscatel hogsheads, bigger cask, 250 litre cask, and then leaving it in there to do its thing. And the rate at which this kind of lifted flavour from these barrels, and it just kind of married really beautifully in there.
It's got a really lovely orange note in it.
Yeah.
Like orange blossom and candied orange in it, which is really nice. Quite a good autumnal whiskey.
Yeah.
Definitely.
So it's been really well received. They all have, but I think this definitely put us on the radar of a few kind of writers and that kind of thing. I mean, we've got a lot of good pals in the industry, and we've got a lot of support, which has been absolutely brilliant. But I think this went out to a lot of people, and they were like, "Oh wow, we actually really, really, really like this," and this is really drinkable. And
it is, it's very drinkable, very, very easy to drink.
I don't know how it was for you guys in the shop and wine and beer sales or whatnot, but like when we were selling this, and obviously, we would normally be selling cases of whiskey to shops such as this, but also we sell direct to our fans and followers. And we saw a lot of multiple purchases on this bottle. Kind of one bottle and then another one and another one, another one.
Coming back to it,
so it was, I think it got a lot of love. I think the circumstances in which people were tasting it.
And they were like, "Oh, yeah." Well, it was. I think there was a lot of alcohol consumed during lockdown. So, Samara's just asked, how long was it in the Muscatel cask, or is that a kind of secret? I'm
not going to tell you outright, but we did the piece of work on re-racking October, November, and we released this in March. So.
Okay, so it's spent a good little while in there, just relaxing.
Just say it. There you go.
About 6 months.
We try not to talk about the length, because when you're a young distillery, people, you get a lot of, obviously, and you'll have heard this loads.
Yeah.
It is the age thing, and people kind of always hang the hat on the age thing. It's like, well, age equals quality, age equals better.
Yeah.
And if you hopefully anybody who's tasting these is in a position where they go, actually, 3.5, 4-year-old whiskey can taste really good.
It can, and I mean, one thing as well that I know we've got a few kind of whiskey fans on joining in with this, and one thing that all of them are a non-chill filtered and natural colour as well, I believe, which you know, it's one of those things where you don't necessarily kind of I suppose think about it in terms of the whiskey, well, in terms of the drinks industry, but I know there's a kind of argument against chill filtering, and there are people that really believe that chill filtering takes out some of the essential kind of oils and things like that help bring sort of flavour through. And it's one of those things with colouring as well, where there are some distilleries really upfront about it. I know I mentioned Mac Mira there, that one of their whiskies that they do, the Mac, they put on the bottle that they add colouring in because they say we want to be upfront about it. But there are many that are really quite sneaky about it, and they're going, no, it's natural colouring, and you looking at it thinking, how's that got that very dark colouring, and it's only a young whiskey, and you know, and yeah, so it is one of those. It's always nice to see as well, and I think there is definitely a perception of that. The older the whiskey, the darker the colour, the better the whiskey is going to be, and that you know, it's really not the case. Especially when you're kind of releasing things that are young, and you know, older whiskies will generally, if they've spent longer in a cask, will generally have richer, fuller flavours, and you know, more body and more of those kind of really punchy, bold notes. But sometimes you don't always want a whiskey like that. Sometimes you want something a little bit more delicate. And in that case, a whiskey that's been sat in a cask for, say, 16 years is not going to have that delicate, light flavour that a whiskey that's only 4 years old will have. So, yeah, I think hopefully one day people will realise that just because it's more expensive and it's older doesn't make it better. So,
well, you know, the good work that people such as yourself, Hannah, and other people working in specialists up and down the land, educating, and you're absolutely bang on, you know. So the colour thing, all natural colour. We'll never be adding colouring to the whiskey. Just the whole concept of chill filtering for us, it just doesn't make sense. It's not something to do. To do all the work that we do, to put all the effort in that we do into to refine the processes we have, and create a kind of really beautiful fruity spirit and put it into the best cast that we can get, and all of that, and to take it to the final step before bottling, and then to take something away from it, doesn't work for us now. It'd be different if you're making hundreds of thousands of cases of whiskey and you're selling it all around the world, and that whiskey can be drunk on a beach in Brazil, and its purpose is to be drunk with ice and mixers or whatever, then it makes complete sense to chill filter. But in terms of what we're doing, and the people that are that are buying our whiskey in the main, if they're into kind of heading to shops such as yourselves, it just makes sense, to keep it.
Yeah, definitely.
Anybody got any questions? Is there any opinion on the Moscatel?
We've got Andrew said that it gives a lot more richness and body than Moscatel, and so it's really lovely. And you do definitely get. I think the fruit flavors are more pronounced in this than it is in the first or second release. Going back to the second release, smelling it, there seems to be more of like a nuttiness in comparison to this, where you get much more of that kind of rich fruit. And it does just feel a little bit more, I suppose, lush and a little bit more warming in a sense, which is quite nice, I suppose. But it's always, I very much like this. I like that. I like the kind of finishes like this, where it just gives that little bit of extra. I suppose sweetness isn't the right word, but just that little extra bit of punch. But then it depends on the time of year. Because if it was summertime and it was a lovely day, I'd be saying that I'd probably prefer the first or second release because it's really fresh. The one thing I wanted to ask as well is you just mentioned then about, kind of bigger brands that might add colouring or they might chill filter, and it's been, the brands have been sold all over the world and you can drink it on a beach, etc. I just wanted to kind of understand, do you have a sort of vision of how you'd like people to enjoy your whiskey, or do you like it to be sort of quite versatile? So obviously there are some whiskies that work really well as like a long drink. And I think there's certainly a bit of an opinion that, if it's whiskey, you must drink it sat in a big leather armchair with a glass and really think it through, etc., which isn't always the case for some whiskies. Some of them are designed to be kind of mixed, or you can have it, as like a highball with soda. So do you have a sort of vision or an idea of how you'd like your audience to enjoy the whiskey, or do you just kind of put it out there and let people enjoy it as they kind of would just sort of want to?
I've got to say it's definitely the latter.
Yeah.
I think ultimately, when someone buys a bottle of any whiskey, or if they've bought a measure of that whiskey in a bar, it's now their whiskey, and it is entirely up to them to drink it, and they should drink it how they enjoy drinking it, and they should never let anybody tell them different. It's all about how you enjoy it. That's what it comes down to. And for myself, and I'll speak for you as well, Hannah, because I suspect, and I'd say a fair number of people watching this as well. We get a lot of enjoyment from drinking it in this form as it is, because we understand it and we like drilling into the flavors and the layers of flavors and exploring that. And that's brilliant. That brings us a lot of enjoyment. And I think the whiskey industry relied on people drinking whiskey as we are tonight, there wouldn't be a whiskey industry.
I think I always think it's interesting in that kind of putting that sort of question out there. We've just got another comment about the Muscatel saying that the finish is wonderfully smooth and it's very drinkable, which is one of the great things that when you have a whiskey like this, and you can just sort of sip it and just keep sipping it, which reiterates your point about people kind of rebuying it and coming back to it. But yeah, there does definitely seem like that's the way that you must drink all your whiskies. You should drink it just as it is and neat. And I suppose to some extent, having a whiskey from having a whiskey neat, you try it neat, you try different kind of flavors, you'll get different notes coming through with it. But if you start kind of experimenting with it as well, or say you prefer to have a little bit of soda in there, have it as as I say, as a highball, nice, and have it as fresh sort of style of drink, or the whiskey sour, you start getting more different notes through from it. And I think
really, really well made, really lovely, skilled cocktail making, really delicious long drinks with whiskey. I mean, who doesn't want to drink a nice hot highball on a sunny day?
That's lovely.
In my opinion, great. We've done, we've really only just scratched the surface in terms of kind of what works with our whiskey in terms of cocktails. We've done we do a kind of what we call the kind of the Spirit of Yorkshire highball when we've done events at the distillery and that kind of thing. It's just really super simple. Just a kind of tall glass packed with ice, loads of ice in there, and a good measure of whiskey, and then we'll top it with ginger ale, and then
that sounds
nice. Really, 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 really fresh, very, very, very bright oranges, and get that peel around the glass top, and there's that little bit of fizz lifts the orange peel, and you get the whiskey running through it, and it's really refreshing.
I can imagine that working well with the Muscatel. Actually.
It's a great icebreaker, especially when hot days, and you've got a group of people on their way into a gig or whatever, and that's perfect.
I do think it's interesting going whenever we do sort of gin tastings, and we often say to people, try the gin neat. And we, when we could do tastings in store or do little tasters, we obviously can't at the moment. We'd give people kind of the gin neat to try, and some people are like, I can't drink it neat, I need a tonic with it. But with spirits, I suppose that both. I mean, with gin, it can be quite versatile. You can try it neat, and then as you add tonic, it will change. But I suppose the same applies for whiskey as well. And you will try something. I suppose when you've got all these different sort of factors that go into making it, trying it neat, and then maybe have it neat and go, well, actually, I think this, like you mentioned then about the ginger ale, I think, oh, that actually might work really nicely with this if I make it into something else. So, yeah, no, it's always nice to know when a distillery is kind of like, drink it as you want. I think that's always, people get a little bit caught up sometimes, like, oh, it's not the proper way to drink it. And it's like, there shouldn't be a proper way to drink it, really. Drink it as you would like to. So,
exactly. Exactly right.
Would you like me to move forward with the presentation?
Yeah. Let's look at some pics. Nice shot of the spirit flowing. I put that in there partly just to kind of show you. For a lot of people, they're not often aware that the spirit, when it runs off the stills, is completely clear. But, all the colour is being driven by the casks that we're using. In terms of the production in the middle cut that we take, it's a very, very, very tight cut. It's very early in the run. We're in for making light fruity whiskey, so we want to keep that middle cut nice and tight, and we do that using various parameters, which you'd see in a lot of distilleries. In terms of where you put your middle cut. And for the uninitiated, the middle cut is just about finding the sweet spot in the middle of the run with the flavours that you want for the whiskey that you're making. And all that wash that we've distilled on the first run, you've collected all the alcohol out of that wash, and you've also brought with it all the flavour compounds with that. And there's flavour compounds in there that you want and some that you don't. And the middle cut is about cutting in the ones that you want. Yeah. I'll try and keep it simple and brief.
my sweet spot, as the Smith advert mentions, the heads, tails, and the hearts. You want that nice little sweet spot of that's what we want in there.
And when we do the cut on a morning, so we've got our spirit safe open. And again, if you come do it all, you can get into this in more detail. But we're looking at time, temperature, and strength. But we have a couple of nosing glasses by the spirit safe, and we'll always just give it that extra bit of time and checking, because that final sensory step around where you put that cut can really just help you keep it nice and tight and make sure you're not letting any flavours through the door that you don't want. And crucially, at the end of the cut, that you're not reaching into the slightly darker flavours which emerge and move in slightly later in the run. So nice tight cut, really light, fruity, sweet. On top of this, we do have 2 distillate styles. Now I'm going to summarise this real quickly as best I can. We've got a kind of style of new make spirit, which is what we say is our more traditional style, which is just off the pots. But actually, if you just skip back, Hannah, sorry, we're on that slide forever. It didn't talk about. And actually, it's not very good, because the piece of equipment that I was going to talk about is hiding behind the still. We've got if anybody's got a box at home, if you've got a box there, we talk about it on the back there, and
actually I've got it there.
It's this piece of equipment, if I can line that up. There we are, and it's a 4-plate copper column, so we can basically bounce the spirit vapor through that if we choose to. And when we do that, it creates a lighter style of new make spirit, and you're stripping out more impurities because you've got more copper contact. And when we cut that, it's a higher strength, so it'll be typically 86% in the middle cut, which is pretty punchy by most people's standards, as opposed to our more traditional style, which is a mere 73% in the middle cut.
Still punchy enough to make you go blind.
Well, it can be challenging on a Monday morning, depending on what kind of weekend you've had. But it's really interesting. Having 2 styles of new make spirit means that you can. You've got options, so we're focused on, first of all, bourbon, but all those bourbon casks are split out. You've got the pot stuff and the common stuff. It means you can,
the different flavours from each as well. As you mentioned, column still, you get that lighter, sort of fruitier style, and then the pot stills where you get your heavier sort of styles. And,
and it gives us options, and it means you can bring them together in different ways and different ratios and create different mouthfeels and textures, and, as you pointed out, flavours. It's an extra string to our bow. I mentioned twists and turns in our production that other distilleries don't have, and that is definitely one of them. So that's a really cool extra piece of production, equipment that we can use. So yeah, now let's move on.
Yeah. So you mentioned the new make spirit, and as you see there, it's coming off the still completely clear, and then we can see we're going on to the next one, which is the STR cask. And when you look at the kind of colour difference in between these, they really are quite different in colour.
They really are.
And it's a natural colour, so it was once obviously that clear water-like colour, and now gone into this lovely dark, rich whiskey.
So the STR finish, which is a bit of a mouthful in terms of explaining it. We referred to it on the front of the label because it means a lot to us. And we worked with an absolutely brilliant master of whiskey called Dr. Jim Swan, and he was the kind of trailblazer for this cask type. It was his baby. It was his invention, and it's basically about optimizing a cask for whiskey production. And the S is standing for shaved, T for toasted, and the R for recharred. So shaved, toasted, and recharred. And the cask in question was an ex-Rioja wine cask.
Oh, okay.
So this is in a simple form a Rioja wine finish, but the cask has been reconditioned. The purpose of this reconditioning is to kind of taper down the impact of the wine from the previous incumbent of the cask.
Yeah, because I suppose with some casks, if you think with Rioja, they, depending on what type of Rioja cask it is, there's different sort of stages of Rioja, but you're looking at kind of, I think, around about 18 months or so that a lot of wineries will do. And then if you're looking at kind of like brand reserve cask, sometimes it can be sort of 2 to 3 years it spends in the cask. And I believe, I should probably know this off the top of my head, but I think it is mainly new oak in Rioja, maybe a little bit of old oak. I should know that, but I will need to double check that. But depending on the oak as well, it will soak, the oak will kind of soak in the wine and the flavours and things as well. So I suppose kind of putting whiskey straight into a cask like that can kind of, especially with the whiskies that we've tried, they have a really delicate balance to them. Putting it straight into a cask that's just had wine in it, not had any kind of conditioning, can probably overpower it a little bit. Which is why kind of shaving it, toasting it, and kind of recharring it is important. So you get some of those flavors, but you don't just kind of bombard the whiskey with wine and make it into some odd whiskey wine mix.
You can you can easily overwhelm your spirit character. You've got really, really active casks, and it's easy to do with tiny casks, so if you're filling loads of little barrels, you can run into the same problem. We'd say problem depends what you want to make. But with the shaving, toasting, and recharring on these Rioja casks, they were new oak in the case of the, can't speak for wider Rioja production, but in the case of these, they were new oak when they were filled Rioja. Rioja in this case has been in there for about 5 years, so you can imagine that it's really got into the wood. The wine is disgorged. It's gone back to the cooperage guys that we work with, which is Jose Miguel Martin, and these guys have knocked the ends off the cask, shaved a few millimeters off the inside, built a little fire with the shavings, rolled the cask over that. That's the toasting bit. and which creates this kind of caramelized layer inside the cask, and then they rechar it, and then we roll it through the distillery. It gets a little squirt of sherry for transport, little squirt, so they don't come out, and then they roll through the distillery doors, and we've charged them with spirit, and yeah, it's probably the first whiskey that we released, and I'm really interested to see what everyone thinks here. I did a whiskey cheese pairing with Yorkshire Wine School. If any of you, I was with Laura, and that was obviously a very wine focused bunch, and they were this. They absolutely loved it, and it came in as the favourite on the evening. But when we've had it out on tours and we've got kind of more whiskey people, it's the first thing that we've released which really seems to divide opinion. Some people are really into it, some people are less into it, and I'm keen to see what all you guys think tonight, really. See what you make of it. It is a different beast to what we've been tasting.
It's definitely got that like rich vanilla and like warm sort of spice element to it, and you get a much kind of fruitier, punchier flavors coming through on that, but definitely. But then it's a very lengthy whiskey, that one. I feel like I can still taste it now, actually.
Yeah, it keeps going.
Keeps kind of like, yeah.
It's got some oomph, and yeah, I mean, we were astonished how much colour it was drawing, and kind of how fast it was developing in these casks. And
the one thing I'd noticed about this is that it's kind of with the other whiskies, they're aromatic, but they're not like kind of super forthcoming. So they kind of open up over time a little bit. Where this one, it seems that this has got quite a kind of punchy flavour coming straight off it. Which you get that kind of immediate sort of like vanilla-y, like cinnamon sort of like nose on it. But then as that kind of like burns off a little bit, you start to get this more delicate kind of fruits coming out of it, I think. So it's a very interesting kind of layered whiskey, which is obviously something that you're kind of working to put in, and you want to build the layers into the whiskey. And I think that one is quite a good kind of like example of how the different layers sort of work.
Am I sensing that this is your favourite so far, Hannah, or am I?
I think the Moscatel might be my favourite so far, possibly.
It's a hard to follow.
But then people will ask me, "Oh, what's your favourite gin, or what's your favourite whiskey?" And in all honesty, it's really hard. It's really hard to pinpoint kind of one or two, because I can imagine that the Moscatel one would be lovely for like a really nice crisp autumn day, and maybe it's like kind of mid-October, where the STR is something that you'd sit and drink when it's really cold, and I can imagine drinking it in the run up to Christmas and feeling like very festive drinking it. So they're kind of different styles. Like you said, it's like a different kind of beast. So it's a sort of different style in that. And so, I mean, Samara said it's really interesting. It's very complex. It's got a really nice balance to it. And I think you certainly get that on the nose when you first sort of smell it. You're like, wow, that smells. You can smell the vanilla and all those sort of flavors coming off it. But as you kind of dive into it more, that's where it starts revealing itself to be like, oh no, it's not all just this. We've got all these bits in here as well. But yeah, I'll have to have a think about that.
Yeah, we wanted to be able to demonstrate that we weren't just making the one style of whiskey. And we kind of started. I mean, interestingly, so over this year, we're now you can buy Yorkshire whiskey in Italy. You can buy Yorkshire whiskey in Poland.
Wow.
And you can buy Yorkshire whiskey very soon in France and very soon in Germany.
Wow.
And what's really important when you're going into a market and you don't have the backup of a kind of, you don't have the distillery there, you don't have the team of people that you work with out there talking about it, you don't have people coming to you to learn about it and talk about it. So you need to be able to demonstrate that you've got a range or in the pipeline. Eventually we want to arrive at a nice core range. That's always been the plan.
Yeah.
And we want to have a nice bourbon cask representative and our sherry cask representative, something cask strength in there, maybe even something peated at some point later down the line.
I think that would interest a few people.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely. And these early releases for us are about finding finding our way into that core range. Because when these have gone, they've gone. They're not.
Yes.
They'll never come back with the exact same form.
No, of course, yeah. I mean, we've had a comment that it would be lovely. They think it'd be lovely with Christmas cake, and I can kind of really sort of see that pairing working nicely with that. But what's kind of interesting, I was just thinking about it, when you kind of taste it and you have it in your mouth, it feels like a whiskey that should be much older than it is. You forget that this is only still a very young whiskey. It's only 3-4 years old. Drinking it, you would be mistaken. For me, I kind of think, it could have kind of passed for being an older whiskey, which is quite interesting to see how that kind of cask finish has influenced the whiskey to kind of bring out that kind of richness. And obviously that's a testament to how it's been made as well. It's been made incredibly well. So so sometimes
I'll take that very much. It's not an accident, the way that we're doing all the steps in production, and the way that, the whole principle around how we make whiskey, and the whole ethos of the distillery. We're doing everything at every step with the best, technique, ingredients, that we can, and the best equipment and the best cast and all that kind of thing. But what you find, or what you can find in younger distilleries is, there is a lot of care and attention put into these early steps of production.
Yes.
So that middle cut, our middle cut is arguably more refined perhaps than a very well-established old distillery that is making vast, hundreds of millions of liters of alcohol a year. Sorry, well, tens of thousands of liters of alcohol, every month, and they don't have to worry as much because they can put that spirit into cask and they can leave it for 10 years, 15 years. And the time in the wood is going to soften that out, and it doesn't, that you can arguably work with a slightly less refined middle cut. Now, that's not to say that is a bad thing. It's great if you've got that stock, and that's part of your character and part of the way that you do it. Whereas we've got to be, we're looking to take out, Cavalan have absolutely nailed this, and of course they work very, very closely with Jim Swan as well. And you're taking out in the early steps of production, which otherwise, or arguably, you might in older traditional whiskey making try to lose in years of maturation.
I suppose I did photography at uni, and one of the things that I used to hate doing was sitting and editing photos. I much preferred to spend the time setting up the shot and making sure it's right there, as opposed to trying to edit it in post-production. And I suppose you can kind of, like, a metaphor from in that sense would be that they used to say, take an extra 5 minutes to make sure you've got your exposure, you've got your lighting right, this is set up properly, and blah, blah, blah. You'll save yourself an hour sat in Photoshop trying to correct it. And I suppose it kind of works in a similar way, in that taking that extra kind of care and time in the early stages, making sure that the heart's exactly as you want it, is going to save you that time, and save you kind of having to kind of correct it with other things like other barrels or maturation and things like that. And you kind of almost gain more control over what you're making, because it's spending that extra little bit of time just to make sure it's right and as you want it at that beginning stage. you're going to make sure it's right kind of the rest of the way. And Andrew's kind of mentioned that he actually thinks the STR is more delicate than the Muscatel and very kind of complex. And as it's opened up in the glass, obviously you get that first kind of wave of flavors coming through from it. But as it opens up, it does start to reveal itself and kind of does still fit in with the house style, which obviously is something that, you know, you want to make sure you do. But yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I'm very happy with that. So does that feel like, you know, I mean, you've got the kind of the keys to people's opinion there. So is it a hit? So people liking it?
Yeah, it seems like it is. It from what the comments that have come through, and obviously not everybody chooses to use YouTube for the comments, which is obviously perfectly fine. But we'll obviously get feedback from it as well. And it just seemed that like it's hit a little bit of a spot, and it certainly seemed to people have kind of gone, oh, that's interesting. Because I will say, in comparison to the others that we've tried, it is quite. At first, it is quite kind of like a bit kind of away from the other three that we've tried. It's kind of taken a step out and gone, I'm a little bit different than this one.
Yeah.
But as I say, it still sits within the house style. It's not insanely different, like it's gone right to the other end of the scale sort of thing, whereas it's just like, what is this? No, but it seems that people find it really interesting, and complex is definitely the thing that's coming up from it. There's a nice complexity in it. So yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Can you roll on a shot?
Lovely.
See where we get to. Yeah, that's quite nice. Quite an old photo. We don't have that. Was a pyramid of casts that we had at the back of the still house. That's quite good because that pretty much represents a week's production.
Oh wow! So you've got a fair amount of casks per week there, but then at the same time, not that many in comparison to other houses. I mean,
yeah. So we make in terms of kind of how you tend to measure distilleries' capacity is in litres of pure alcohol, and our litres of pure alcohol a year is 82,000 at the minute. You know, we've got a lot of room to grow, obviously with the amount of barley that we're yielding from the farm, but also with the equipment we've got, we can grow into the capacity of the equipment and the barley crop. But yeah, you know, to give that some context, so we're filling, you know, 14, 15 bourbon casks a week, and we're 82,000 litres of pure alcohol a year. Something like Glenfiddich, when last I checked, 12 million litres of pure alcohol a year.
Yeah, they are really, really quite big in comparison. I mean, even when you look at Nicker, we did the Nicker whiskey tasting. I know some of you guys were on, and the Nicker whiskey tasting, Steph showed a picture of the kind of warehouses, and even though they're not particularly tall, there is quite a lot of warehouses you can see of these stocks. And I mean, obviously they've been going for you know, sort of 70 sort of years now, so 70 or 80 sort of years actually. So obviously they do have more stock, but
they certainly do. And what the advantage of having that legacy of maturing stock is you can make very, very, very polished whiskey. Yes. You know, and that is something that they are very, very good at, and I admire greatly and enjoy drinking very much. Yeah.
The Japanese are always good at blending. They're always very, very particular, which is something interesting. But it's always nice when you see the casks like that as well. I think kind of makes people realise, oh yeah, it does actually sit in wood.
Oh yeah, definitely. So the bourbon barrels that we got there, first fill bourbon barrels, and they previously held a bourbon called Old Forester, if anyone was wondering.
Yeah.
And we as I say, that's the main cask type that we fill. We bring them over fresh from Kentucky, 212 at a time. If you ever wondered how many bourbon barrels you can fit in a container, that's how many.
Wow.
And yeah, we draw on that pool of casks every week until we get another fresh delivery in. The bigger casks that you can see in the background, they are sherry butts.
Yeah.
So they're much bigger, 500 litre capacity. And if you just jump onto the next slide, next shot. This is our main warehouse up at the farms. This is one section of it. So you can see how the bulk of our warehousing works. But you can see there the bourbon barrels in comparison to the barriques.
Yeah.
The casks on the right there are actually, they are a number of those are the ex-Rioja wine casks.
Okay.
So that's what they look like size-wise. So they're kind of 220 litre capacity.
Yeah. Yeah. So they're not massive then.
No,
they're not massive casks then. Which actually then also kind of makes me understand a little bit more why the flavour in the STR has got that lovely intensity in it. Because with it being a slightly smaller cask, obviously there's more surface area and
sherry butts are arguably, at least on paper, you're going to fill a 500 litre casks, you're in for the long game. Especially if they are refill sherry butts, they are slow, but
slow burners.
Yeah, you're going to get a bit more punch when you're looking at this. But that's the minimum cask type size that we fill unusually for a young distillery is 200 litres, and we haven't. That's not to say that we won't fill smaller casks or that we never or we don't like them or anything like that. But that's our starting.
Yeah, good sort of sweet spot. We have got a message from Tom. He said that they're all the whiskies are hits for him. He said, for young whiskies, they're very drinkable, and the Moscatel and STR cask bring interesting complexity. Well done, Joe. Looking forward to following the distillery over the years. So seems like you've had fun. Good to hear.
We've got one more to try, haven't we?
Yes. The last one is special one. So this one is the Yorkshire Day release. Yeah.
You got it. So it was the first kind of really limited bottling of whiskey that we've done, just 1,500 bottles. It's also the oldest stock that we've bottled to date. Given that we had our kind of 4th birthday back in May, it's still young whiskey, but it does have an extra year under its belt compared to what we've tasted. Combination of 5 casks used for this. And one of the casks in question was a PX Pedro Jimenez sherry butt. So one of the big casks that we were talking about before. And that is meeting bourbon casks, and the two are coming together in this bottling. It's much stronger than the others, 55%. So it's got a bit of punch. And we release it. The plan for this, we do an open day every year, usually around Yorkshire Day, and we were going to do this as our open day bottling. And I suspect if that had gone ahead, and we'd not been all struck by the year's events, then I very much doubt we'd have any of this left.
That I suppose a blessing and. Not necessarily a blessing, a silver lining. That's what.
It's a little bit, because what it meant we could do was, meant that we could, get some of this out to some of our favourite whiskey shops, such as yourselves, and it's a bit of a leap in price. We've gone 55 quid with the first and second release, and £60 for the finished whiskies, and this we put out at 85. So it's a leap in price, but in context of what would have been a distillery exclusive bottling, reward for people that are coming out to see us on the coast, and something which does definitely carry that collectible value. And this is a special release that we'll be doing year on year. So it's one of these things. If people want to build that set, then you don't want to miss it. But I was drinking this last night actually, and in a unusual whiskey tasting that I was a part of, and yeah, it's very different to what we'll have tried so far. Obviously, the strength does make a difference.
See, that for me is like salted caramel. It's definitely got a kind of coastal, slightly salty influence on that. And then when you taste it, I was like, oh, it's a little bit salty, and then it goes to like this lovely rich caramel. I was like, oh, yeah, salted caramel. So I have a habit of putting things into quite kind of basic sort of descriptions. There's a wine I tasted a few weeks back that tasted like apple pie, apple crumble and custard, and then it was a very lovely complex wine, but yeah. That's what
tasting notes don't need to be complicated. We try and I'm with you there, Hannah, 100%. We try and keep them down to like 4 things.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. When you look at kind of the back of the bottles as well, it does like kind of have quite nice, neat sort of tasting notes of like dried fruits, cocoa, hazelnut, and a few other bits and pieces. So there has been whiskey things I've read before where it's like this whiskey will take you to this place and is reminiscent of these things, and I'm like, well, it doesn't tell me anything about what it tastes like. So it's all good and well, but what does it so
there's a few that are guilty of that.
Yeah.
I won't name names, but there was a run of limited release bottlings from a distillery, and you would open the tube and out would come a book, like a pamphlet. If you lifted it out by the top, it would just keep going, and you end up with multiple pages and tasting over the entire thing. Yeah, you know what? I don't think is a bad thing in some ways, but you could definitely see some people looking at that going, "Wow, that is touching on the ridiculous."
Definitely. And I suppose kind of at the moment as well, because we can't kind of do the sort of tastings we do. I mean, I know so many of you are familiar with the store and have been in plenty of times, but for those that aren't, we usually have underneath the counter we have loads of sort of spirit bottles open. Unfortunately, we don't have wine open because we can't kind of keep it fresh. But spirits, we have a wide selection open, and things like Filey Bay, with it being quite a popular one and something that we're like we kind of want to push, we would have sample stock of it. So when we can, we will be offering tasters again. So if you're coming in looking for something, or you perhaps tried it and then gone, you know what, I really can't remember what that tasted like. Do you have any open? If we've got it open, we're always happy to give people a sample, which always, is really, really helpful for people when they're deciding, especially if it's a gift for somebody and they want to make sure they're getting the right product. So it's great. Obviously, we can taste them here. So it is nice when you've got quite succinct, kind of to the point tasting notes about these kind of products as well, that people can kind of look at quite kind of just very matter of fact and go, okay, well, this one sounds a little bit more up their street than this one does. This one might be a little bit too much on this side. There's lovely long story like tasting notes are fantastic, but sometimes you just kind of want to know what the kind of key flavors are and whether you think that would work for that, whether that works for you or for the person you're buying for. So
yeah, definitely.
I do think it's
the strength of a good specialist booze shop, and like being able to taste stuff. We are well aware that if somebody wants to buy a bottle of the whiskey we're making and they never come across us, know nothing about us, and they've got to make that decision on either what that bottle is saying or how it looks. Also, ideally, and this is why we sell whiskey to specialist shops. This is why we don't sell whiskey to kind of supermarket shelves, because it's something that needs that bottle to be open, and it needs to be able to taste it and get a chance to see what it's about. wherever we go and wherever we're talking about whiskey is you support your local specialists, because they are so important in terms of discovering delicious booze. You just
I would definitely agree with that. My job also relies on that as well. So, but yeah, no, it is important. And I suppose when you do tours, do you offer tasting with the tours as well, or?
Yeah, that's right. So if you book a tour with us, you're going to spend a good hour going around the distillery. We've got quite a, we've definitely got a more technical tour than most distilleries. We don't have 200 years of kind of romance stuff to fall back on. We do look at production. Anybody who comes and does a tour with us leaves with an understanding of how whiskey is made and how we make it, certainly. And at the end, you sit down, 3 drams. At the moment, you'd be tasting the last 3 that we've tasted tonight.
Yeah.
We have some, but we do keep it moving around in terms of what we're tasting on the tours. But anybody can stick their head through the door, just like they can with you guys, and have a little, what is it? Can I take a little bit? Like, yeah.
And have you found that obviously, you said then about you've not got the kind of the romance and the history that you can kind of build on with the tour, and then you mentioned at the beginning that there are distilleries that make whiskey that have gone down the gin route as well. So they have, you are solely whiskey distillery, and whiskey in the UK is still a relatively kind of new and a much smaller industry than it is in Scotland, etc. How do you find it with kind of other distilleries? Do you find that you kind of get on quite well with them? Is there a good kind of rapport within the English whiskey community, or is it kind of a little bit like it's not sort of grown quite yet? Because into the sort of community like perhaps the gin community has, I suppose.
Sure. I mean, we talk regularly with our counterparts, and there is. I mean, in terms of the potential of English whiskey is enormous right now in terms of the benchmark of quality of what we're all making, and a lot of us coming of age at a similar time. So you're in a position now where you can walk into a whiskey shop and you can see a shelf of English whiskey.
Yeah.
I mean, I think back 10 years that just would never have seemed possible. If someone said, "Show me your shelf of English whiskey, please," you're like, wow. That just seems so crazy. The community's there and it's strong. We're working collectively towards, kind of being able to kind of firm up what English whiskey is and what will help define it in the future in terms of the production rule book, if you like. We don't have an equivalent to the Scotch Whisky Association or anything like that. But I think certainly in the next 10 years, there's a lot of young distilleries coming online. There's a lot of interesting stuff that's going to be coming up, and I think actually being able to define the category a bit better, being able to protect the quality of what we're all making is really important. And there's a lot of conversations going on around that at the moment. It's been a string this year already. I think 4 or 5 meetings collectively with various English whiskey distilleries to try and work together to create a collective association, whatever you want to call it, to protect what we're all making.
Do you think those rules will be quite important as well, kind of going into the future? Because obviously you mentioned there isn't the Scotch Whisky Association and things like that. We don't have an equivalent of that in England. And I know rules and regulations within alcohol making has its pros and cons when you have kind of like wine regions and they have to follow sort of certain rules and they have to get to a certain percentage of alcohol and blah, blah, blah in order for it to be a wine from that particular region. Do you think that's really going to, how do you think that will help the industry if there are those kind of rules and regulations in place? Do you think that's going to benefit those makers that are kind of really trying to strive forward with English whiskey? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really good point, because you don't have to kind of look around or for too long, or read about whiskey for too long before you'll come across something along the lines of this that association or body or whatever it is. In the case of the wines that you mentioned, it's stifling creativity within that production thing, and it is a really fine line. It's a really fine line, and it is not easy to define. And where do you put that line? But I think what's really important is that there is a line somewhere. It has to go somewhere, because if you don't, I mean, I don't think anybody would ever deliberately set out to make something bad. And if you set out to make whiskey, you've got to want to do it. It's such a long, involved process. It's such a massive project. Certainly to do it on the scale that we are doing it, or Cotswolds are doing it, or Lakes are doing it, Bimber are doing it, or St. George's, and you've got to kind of, at the moment, you're just kind of hoping that everybody wants to do it really, really well, and will do it the best they can. Whereas what it might need in the future is a little bit more than that, just to kind of get there's a standard now, and it's got to be good.
I suppose you can. I suppose you sort of compare it a little bit to the gin industry, in that obviously the gin industry in the UK is very very young, in that the gin boom is in sort of 10, 11 years old, and as we mentioned, it's a relatively quick process, much cheaper than making something like whiskey. It's not got the same length, and there are distilleries popping up left, right, and centre. I think when I've done a couple of gin tastings and looked at the stats, I think last year was 2018 was something like 360 odd registered distilleries. This year it's about something like 420 registered distilleries in the UK. And for the first time ever, the UK has more registered distilleries than Scotland, which is pretty mad considering the amount of whiskey distilleries up there. Obviously, not every single distillery in the UK is making purely gin. There are those that are experimenting, and people like, obviously yourselves, you don't make gin at all, you make whiskey. I mentioned Cotswolds that set out to be a whiskey distillery and only made the gin as a side project just to make some money from it. But in that happening, there is kind of distilleries popping up, as we mentioned, in kitchens, in the back of houses. But with that, I know a few years back, there was a few in the industry like Hayman's Gin who kind of launched this campaign against what they called fake gin, and they wanted a campaign for real gin, because they felt that there was people kind of taking advantage a bit of the fact that gin was so popular. And there's a distillery in question, a Manchester-based distillery, that released a very popular violet-based gin liqueur. That got in quite big trouble for it, because when you look up the definition of gin, it has to be above 37.5% and a juniper-based spirit. And it wasn't fitting that description, but they were putting on the label violet gin, and putting gin quite big, and then liqueur in little tiny letters, where they had to sort of change that. And I know if you look at Edinburgh Gin now, their liqueurs as well, they are Edinburgh Gin, and it's their flavoured liqueur, so it's their raspberry liqueur as opposed to raspberry gin liqueur, because there needed to be that kind of tightening on it. So I guess, do you think that getting those rules in sort of early do you think that's going to stop people a little bit? I mean, I suppose we're not going to see the same extent of people bastardising that, because obviously it's a much longer, much lengthier, much more full-on process making whiskey. But I suppose, do you think that putting those rules in place quite early is going to kind of deter people from kind of taking advantage of it and just going crazy and making kind of? Yeah,
I think you've kind of raised some really interesting points on it, and you're absolutely right. What has happened, and may still be happening to some extent, is that that's kind of just people riding on the coattails of the success of and whiskey is more enduring than other spirits because of the time involved to make it and the nature of what it is. And as I say, I think in its nature, I don't think people would ever be looking to make a quick bit of cash doing it. There's a lot easier ways to do that. I think there needs to be a little element of you've got to really got to want to do it to make whiskey. And I think you're right. I think a bit of regulation at this stage, just enough to make it clear.
Yeah.
What you have to do is a really positive thing, and it'll just help people thinking about doing it, or the people thinking of, should we embark on this?
Yeah.
Make their decision making process simpler, easier, and I think it is. I think ultimately it'd be a positive thing for the industry, and this is why it's really difficult, because of course you've got a collective of various owners. They've got to work all this out, and keep it fair, and keep it open, and keep it really, really, like I say, that fine line,
of course, And I suppose my kind of final question on that is that, do you think as well, on the flip side of it, putting in the kind of rules and regulations, do you think that it will help other people take English whiskey more seriously? Because I mean, we will get people that come into the shop and will say, "Oh, I'm after something a bit different or interesting." They'll go, "Oh, we've got some whiskey from Sweden, or we've got some, English whiskey, or blah blah blah." And they go, "Oh, no, it's got to be Scotch. It's got to be a Scotch whiskey, and it's got to be a single malt." So do you think, I suppose as well, putting in those rules and regulations, I'm assuming they will help people kind of go, well, actually, there is that in place, that it does mean, that it is kind of proper whiskey, I guess. Do you think, I suppose, do you agree that would help it kind of be taken more seriously, I suppose?
Yeah, I think there's definitely some truth to that. I mean, if you've got a customer who is beelining for single malt Scotch, there's a reason for that, and that is because you've got a really good quality, very well established product, and the rules around making it have helped establish that and what it is. And so, that makes sense to me. I can understand that, and I think it would help in that sense. I have to say, it's not something that I've run into a lot of. Definitely a lot earlier, when we opened the doors to the public, Easter 2017, and you get some people coming through the door going, "This is going to be rubbish." Do you know what I mean? You're definitely going to make bad whiskey because you're in Yorkshire. You just can't be done. It can't be done. It must be. And you spend a bit of time with them, and you talk to them, and you get some spirits to their lips and whiskey to their lips, and they help them understand it. It changes the conversation, but I think, to reiterate your point, would it help, and would it help it be taken more seriously? I don't think it'd make anyone take it less seriously. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, fair enough. That's a good way of putting it. I've just seen another comment from Sis. She said about just going back to the whiskey and whiskey kind of notes and on the bottle and things. She said that technical info on whiskey making is definitely preferable to awful fake folklore / legend of, and she said naming no guilty distilleries. But yeah, I can kind of, I think I would agree from that. And from a selling point of view as well, it does make it a lot easier, because obviously, I mean, you can see behind here we've got a wall of wine, and as much as we do try and remember all the finer details about things, sometimes we are only human, and there's many a times when my brain just doesn't work properly, and I'm like, I need to check that. so yeah, it's always good to have it as a reference. But yeah,
definitely, it helps cut through the noise, doesn't it?
Yes. But yeah, so we have now come to the end. We've gone through all the whiskies. Be interested to see as to what the favorites were. I think from the comments, it seems like it's quite mixed. I think people are. I think the Moscatel and the STR seem to have gained quite a bit of interest as well. But I actually really like this Yorkshire Day one. I really like that kind of sweet, slightly salty balance on it.
Nice.
Yeah.
You know, it's, as you say, there's a lot of things that make it difficult to make decisions, and you think about it on the spectrum. When would I drink it? Who, you know, what circumstance would I want that style or that flavour? And you know, I think just if you know, they're all good, but they're good for different reasons. They're good for different different combinations, different pairings. I have to say, if I was pushed tonight, you know, the Yorkshire Day bottling is is ticking the box for me this evening personally.
Yeah.
I think that might have something to do with just the higher ABV tonight, to be honest.
Well, yes, I know you are incredibly busy at the moment, doing quite a lot of tastings because it's Virtual Whisky Festival, isn't it? This week and weekend, I think. But yeah, I think looking at the comments, Moscatel, probably Moscatel favourite, STR, one of the favourites as well. The group decision that the Moscatel won. But I think the general consensus is that they've all been enjoyed. So yeah, seems like the Moscatel seems to have just picked the others for this one. It has been a nice. I mean, I'm not quite sure in Yorkshire, but up in Filey, but it's been quite a nice crisp day here today. So it's been better than it was yesterday, because it was very miserable yesterday. Very rainy. So. Then Andrew's put that the Yorkshire Day with a drop of water in to mellow it a bit. Also loved the first edition. It's very sad that it's now sadly all gone. Yeah, it is one of those things, I suppose, with new releases.
There's not a lot we can do about it, you know. But you know, just keep your ears to the ground. You know, they are cropping up here and there. There's been some bottles flying around on auction, which have been quite interesting how they've developed. But yeah, you know, if you're desperate for a bottle, I'm sure someone will sell you one.
Maybe come in, you know, drop us an email, see what we can do.
There we go.
If you're ever familiar with Jeff and Barry, they are definitely like to collect things. I'll put it that way. Although the warehouse is looking quite tidy at the moment, I'm told, so that's all good. So
yeah,
lovely. And yeah, I'm glad that people have enjoyed them, and and as I say, you know, we would usually have these open as samples. We obviously would usually do this kind of in person, with it at the moment, and kind of thinking long term, which is a little bit difficult at the moment. We are kind of thinking as we go into next year, the likelihood of doing kind of in-person tastings is looking relatively slim up until I'm thinking maybe springtime we might be able to start doing that again. But we'll see how things develop. But you know, it's been great to have you on board for this, and it's been nice to kind of sit down and go through the range and talk about it kind of properly. So yeah, really appreciate you coming on, and especially when you're busy at the moment. And hopefully,
it's absolutely no bother, Hannah. It's been a real pleasure, and yeah, I'd like to reiterate thanks to everyone who grabbed a pack and has joined us this evening. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you got something out of it, and you know, you want to learn more. If you do want to drill more into what we're doing, obviously you can find our website. We've got a blog on there. It talks a lot about the farm and that kind of thing. We've got we've got a calendar of events rolling out, you know, over the next few weeks, and on top of that, we're open for tours and that kind of thing. So if you want to drive to the coast, come and see us.
Final question: is there any new releases planned pre-Christmas? Perhaps.
Yeah, I'm just straight away I'm going to jump in. Definitely. Yeah, I've got there's some interesting stuff coming, and some very tasty whiskey inbound, and it's not far away either.
That'll be interesting to get it in, and
I'll be letting you know. Don't worry. As soon as we've got everything pinned down, you'll be amongst the first to know, you guys. Of course you will. So there's definitely more Filey Bay before the year is out.
That's good to know. So I think it could be popular for Christmas time, or popular over time, I suppose. But yeah, definitely as we come up into the dreaded Christmas Christmas period. So, but yeah.
Spoken like someone who works in a booze shop at Christmas.
Unsure of how it's going to quite go this year as well.
Yeah, I bet.
Interesting. So yeah, maybe we'll need some for myself. Let's put it that way. As cope, but yes, but all the comments have been really positive, and as this is said, for a young distillery, it's a great range of very drinkable whiskies that are very approachable. And as much as my boyfriend has a habit of laughing at me when I use the word approachable, talking about wine or spirits, but I do think they're not the type of whiskies to sort of scare people. Sometimes I find with some peaty whiskies, you open it and it's just like, nope, not for me. Or certain wines and things like that. But yeah, they're very, very kind of welcoming whiskies. But yeah, really, really well made and put together. So yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for joining. I hope all the rest of the tastings you've got planned go well. And we look forward to any new releases as well. Looking forward to that.
Nice.
Excellent. And thank you everybody for joining. If you do want to go back and get any extra bits, if you've missed anything, YouTube will record it and you can go on to and rewatch it if there's anything that you want to miss. As always as well, if there's any questions you have, drop us an email, get in touch with us on Facebook, or however pop in store, and we can always answer them. And we can always put anything that we don't know, we can put it forward to Joe as well. So yeah, thank you guys for joining in. Thank you, Joe, for joining in as well. And yeah, have a lovely rest of your evening. Excellent.
Bye.
And we'll speak soon. Bye. Thank you.